Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to yet another edition of Fake Accents Unite. I'm joined, of course, by my long-suffering, dial-up powered, slightly steampunk co-host, the Britisher. Good evening, sir.
Good evening. How dare you in any way associate me with anything that includes the word punk? But anyway, it's good to know that for once we're actually 2 minutes early. So Scowen must be having fits.
Hey, yeah, I know, it's impressive, right? I'm sure...
I mean, this is the day, isn't it? This happens every 27 years. That the clocks go 5 minutes back.
Yes, exactly, right? So we happen to be...
Round about 8 o'clock, I believe it always happens every
half
27...
Half eight, I believe.
27 and a half years, to be precise.
Works off the Gregorian calendar or something, you know. Makes sense to me. Is there something to do with the Mayan or the Kali Yuga or something? I don't know. But yes, welcome to the show. Funny to make your comment about punk, because of course with the pith helmet on, you could be hiding an enormous pink mohawk under there. That's what I'm thinking.
Well, of course, yes.
That's
that is
why
true. Yes.
You require such an enormous bulbous helmet.
Yes, it's not in order to contain my brain that is so voluminous that it actually thrusts upwards from the skull. No, it's in order to contain my pink mohawk. Yes, I particularly like the choice of colour that you selected there.
Well, of course, it's got to be the edgiest, most counterculture, something you would hate actually the most. We could go even further if we want to take the sci-fi lore and say, you know, the pith helmet exists to protect the mohawk because the mohawk is made from your swollen brains that just come out at particular angles. That's Admiral Bees says pink. Never. That's mauve, you upstart.
You see, you could have gone for blue rather than pink, because then we would be able to talk about whether it's navy blue or the other blue.
Well, I believe that actually your mohawk would be blue at the front, white in the middle, and red at the rear.
Yes, yeah. In that case, we are really truly in tricolor country, because. Macron has announced that he is changing the blue in the French flag.
Is he now?
Yes, so he's going back to navy blue. Apparently in 1973 it was changed from navy blue to whatever the blue is called that they were using recently.
I cannot be the only one who has a certain scene in mind at this idea.
Yes. I think it's about shades of grey, isn't it?
Yes. From military grey to what's the other grey that he chooses there?
Just trying to. Yeah, I can't think, but it's two different shades of grey that look identical. Yes,
it must be ocean grey to military.
Is it?
There you go. Yes,
yes. Apparently, they are absolutely distinct and change the entire. Mood of the corridor. Given that they've pretty much got myriad amounts of corridors on Red Dwarf, just so people listening who don't know what we're talking about have a clue what we're talking about, it's the sitcom Red Dwarf, ladies and gentlemen.
They're changing it from ocean grey to military grey, something that should have been done a long time ago. Looks exactly the same to me. No.
And it's the scutters, isn't it?
Yes.
It's those little scutter robots that have to do the painting.
That's the new military grey bit there, and that's the dowdy old nasty ocean grey bit there.
You have watched this series once or twice too often, haven't you?
Or is it the other way around? Yes, a little bit. I've seen Red Dwarf several times, yes.
It's magic. I must say, I do remember when this stuff came out, and I loved it. And yes, all one can point to is the sort of cavernous void of today's comedy, and go, oh, yes, we don't really do that anymore, do we?
There is a funny thing as well with the Scutters in particular, which is that they didn't really expect them to be a kind of, they were very much functional parts of the ship. They didn't invent them really as characters until later on. And you'll recall in a later series when they get they
start watching John Wayne films.
Yes, they have John Wayne films that they're obsessed with, and of course they start to get irritated with Rimmer bossing them around, and of course they've got a claw which is essentially 3 thick fingers, and it allows them to flip him off.
Sufficient for them to stick 2 fingers up to him.
Yes, indeed, and they had to rebuild them in the later series because they misplaced them in the grand archives of the BBC, where they'd been displaced either and reused somewhere else or something, but they couldn't find them. Along with several other props, including things like the bike that Lister has in the early seasons. He just has this...
Oh, yes, that sort of trike with which he's driving around.
Yes, and it gets taken by Crichton in season 2 and goes off. But... and they never see it again. It's just never mentioned. It doesn't turn up. I suppose one of the advantages of... kind of a hodgepodge show like that is you take what you can get and then you just sort of forget things over so many years. But that's my Red Dwarf trivia for the day. It seems to me to be a bit of a strange week, if I'm honest. Everything seems to be going wrong, British show. I don't know how to describe it, but everything... There seems to have been a confluence of particularly vile and violent events this week.
I mean, it depends. It's you can choose your news, can't you? I mean, when you... I'm assuming you, like most of us sort of social media fanatics, have been following the Kyle Rittenhouse story.
With some detail, although I'm obviously not as in-depth as places like Rakita Law or anything like that.
Yes, but... I mean, did you have the laugh out loud moments that I had? When various bits and pieces of clip were kind of showed on Twitter, and you kind of watched this, and at times you just hollered.
I did watch, yes, so some bits were funny. There have been some great memes which have come out of it, actually. Things like Binger, who's one of the prosecution.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Saying, they're putting words in his mouth which he didn't say. Things like, so am I to understand that on the 14th of August you attended a screening of Joker and you were not in the company of a girlfriend? It's things like this. Just the pure character assassination nature of it.
Well, I mean, they went into it at one point, didn't they, that he was playing Call of Duty.
Yes.
Isn't the entire point of the game to shoot anybody who comes at you? And he's sitting there looking a bit baffled, I think. He didn't really think he was going to have to talk about computer games right now.
Yes, but that's a game and this is real life. There's difference, Are you going to talk about the thousands of other people who don't do it? Aside from the fact that he's obviously not even obsessed with firearms, he's not someone with a large collection, with friends with a large collection, who's going down the range every single chance he can to fire things off, and then when he comes back from the range he boots up Call of Duty just so he can shoot brown people. It's just absolutely ludicrous. I did watch. I had in the background.
I mean, I'm quite sure his favourite film is Black Hawk Down.
Oh, of course.
I'm proud of you for actually getting that film reference. Yeah. Usually when I make any sort of film reference, it just goes way above your head.
Well, we have the added benefit that one is actually military related and was kind of played ad nauseum any time when I was in the cadets, but anyway. This kind of surreal thing. They're basically trying to, the whole thing is an ad hom attack. I did listen to some closing statements today, Although it seems to be a very lengthy process, which is still ongoing. I think they allowed 5 hours for it. On top of the judge sort of providing the list of everything that the jury has to consider and what charges are and that sort of thing. But the media in general, the MSM, as we might expect, has been somewhat one-sided on this particular case, would you say? If you were to only
I think that's fair to say, yes.
If you were only to get your information from... I mean, the BBC is, so as far as I can tell, the least bad so far.
Yes.
Of this.
No, I think credit to them, they haven't... Because they don't tend to do that. If they tend to sort of try and, pass on their value judgments, they do it more subtle than just telling you that he's a nutcase running around the city centre shooting people.
Well, they certainly are, but it's more through omission than it is through opinion, right? So,
but I mean, there have been blatant examples of US media just, going ballistic on Rittenhouse. Yes. And it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. What is very interesting to watch is on social media, where in a way the sour grapes are already beginning. So one has watched the trial, or one has seen parts of the trial, and it is beginning to dawn that he's likely going to get off because, what have they got on him? So one is already beginning to blame Binger, the chief prosecutor. One is, of course, blaming the judge.
Yeah, that's
he was biased, and
there's
he
the
was
jury as well,
giving the prosecution much too hard a time, and so on. And one can see that some people are already positioning themselves in a sort of, I won't accept Brexit way, if you know what I mean. It's going to be interesting to see what the media does. I mean, in the, I don't know if you caught that, in a remarkable sort of turnaround, Anna Kasparian from the Young Turks actually did a piece in which she said, okay, we got certain things wrong. Or I think she said, I got certain things wrong.
Have you seen the clip? Is that what you're referring to? Or have you seen the actual video?
I think I've seen a clip of hers.
Okay, so that video was released. The video was that she's referring to was released at the time of the Rittenhouse thing, right? So last year, and the clip that you have seen has been inserted, as I understand it, into that video, but they didn't tell anyone that they had. They've issued the retraction and kind of hidden it back in that video. Oh, now I've changed it.
I'm not sure what you mean, to be honest.
So essentially, it's a re-upload with an additional segment saying I said this at the time and it was incorrect. Right? That's it. But it's not a new video and it wasn't publicised, and people had to go out and find it.
She still must have said it, because, it was...
Yes. Bless me.
Are you sneezing all over the place again?
I am not sneezing all over the place. I'm just a little bit sneezy, that's all.
I can just imagine you there in a mind's eye, wiping down the computer screen right now.
Stop it. I don't have a handkerchief.
This is all due to a cat allergy, I believe.
It is. It is indeed. And I am not looking forward to having to defend against it in the coming months, but, what can you do? But no, the reason I brought up the BBC is because there's this curious omission, as I said. So it says, tensions are high in a Wisconsin city where closing arguments have begun in the trial of a US teen who shot 3 people during civil unrest last year. Now, granted, this article doesn't call those people victims, at least, because some of the US outlets have called it victims. They've also referred to is it Grosskreutz, the survivor?
Yes.
They referred to him as a paramedic or something.
Yes.
even though the man is just does not him. It's not his job. It's not what he was doing anyway. It says here, ahead of the verdict, 500 National Guard troops have been placed on standby. Now, I am curious as to who that's to be on standby against.
We all know who.
Yes.
I mean, who rioted in the first place?
Yes, but they are on their side. They don't. That's not the issue. I'm really sorry. I'll be back in just a second. I need to refresh my face.
Okay, so while not so obvious refreshes his face, whatever that means, I'm not quite sure what he meant there with the 500 guard members being called up because they're on their side. No, I really do think that the guard is being called up because they think there are going to be riots, likely because Rittenhouse is going to be cleared. I really don't think they're bringing in the National Guard because they're afraid that Rittenhouse will be found guilty, and the people from the capital assault are going to descend on Kenosha. So no, I really think that it's quite clear why the guards are being called in, and it's nothing to do with Rittenhouse possibly being deemed guilty. I think that it will more than likely not even happen in Kenosha. I can well imagine that there will be plenty of places in which it will kick off if Rittenhouse is found not guilty.
I think at this stage we could probably say when.
Yeah. I mean, if reason succeeds, it will be when. But the reason I say if is not because I feel there's some grand conspiracy going on or whatever. It's just because I've seen so many court cases over the years where afterwards you looked back and you just went, what? How? And therefore, never rule out the human capacity to just completely screw it up.
True. I am one of the things I don't know if you've caught this, is they are not returning a reverse verdict, shall we say, of self-defense. So this is something which isn't happening. It's not a combination of kind of, well, we were the prosecution and now and then you're the defense, and then it goes the other way around. And it's not like Gross Krauts, for instance, could be sued for
yes.
for his role in the whole thing if it turns out that they rule that he's not guilty of murder.
Well, unless after the not guilty verdict they decide to prosecute Grosskreutz.
Yes, but the question is,
I mean, I think that's highly unlikely.
I think it's unlikely. I feel bad for Rittenhouse in that sense, because he'll never, like, money doesn't make things better. But the man.
Well, I did ask at the end of the week that was, because I went into the Rittenhouse trial in the week that was, and I finished by just basically putting the photo of Grosskreutz and Rittenhouse on the screen and asking the audience when they think these two are going to be running for Congress.
Well, either of them.
Both of them.
Well, both of them.
Put it like this: we are living in a political landscape by now, in which the heroes of the villains of one side immediately are elevated to being the hero of the other side. And so Rittenhouse has now become the indisputed hero. He is patriot, blah 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 blah. And Grosskreutz, he is the same for the other side. And the way this is being defined is because one side basically dislikes these people or loathes these people, the other side has immediately embraced them as champions. And I tell you, if you would put them up as candidates, they would stand a very good chance of winning. Just simply due to the nature of how things are at the moment.
I would struggle to disagree with you on that point, if I'm honest. One of the things which is also of note is that the prosecution does require a unanimous verdict because it is a self-defense case. So only one juror needs to disagree with the others for it to be for him to walk on this, basically, which is another reason I consider it to be a very good chance that he does. But
I mean, as far as I'm concerned, he's been proven innocent. It's not to me. It's not a question of is there reasonable doubt. I just think you listen to the evidence and you just went, I'm sorry, but he's the irony of this whole thing was that he had effectively been proven innocent by the prosecution witnesses.
Yes, they were indicted by their own testimony.
This is what I mean with it was Comedy Central at times. I mean, you got the latest news blitz and you sort of watched a clip and you just burst out laughing, going, how much worse is this going to become for them? And there was that moment, wasn't there, where the other prosecutor, how shall we, in order to be kind, the rather large gentleman who was the other prosecutor.
Ah, yes, the donut.
There was that moment in which he just sat there with his face buried in his hand.
When he's like, and there were two moments, weren't there? The one was he said, and Mr. Rittenhouse did not draw his weapon until you drew your weapon on him. That is correct. Facepalm for the prosecution. Similarly,
so the camera just swung round and you just saw him going, "Oh God, no!"
And then secondly, the other one was when I don't know if it was a defense witness actually, and the prosecution had called someone and said, was the defendant there when Rosenbaum basically attacked? He said, well, he said "F you" and reached for the gun. That was
Richie McGuinness. Yes.
Yeah, that was right.
He works for the Daily Caller.
So
he was kind of a sort of journalist / cameraman, and he was filming, and he was seen as a key witness by both sides because the prosecution. The reason they called him because he was a prosecution witness.
Yes.
The reason they called him was he was witness to the shooting. So they wanted to effectively state, look, what you're interpreting in this is irrelevant. What matters is that you saw Mr. Rittenhouse shoot Mr. Rosenbaum. Whether you think that he was going for his gun, whether you think that he was intending to do this, doesn't matter.
You don't live in his head,
And then, McGuinness just shrugged and went, well, I heard him say fuck you, and then he reached for his gun. And it was just devastating. It was one of those moments where, yes, it was it was one of those sort of knockout moments in boxing where one boxer just catches the other completely and the other chap just goes down like a plank. And you just felt, well, I'm sorry, but this is game over. You can't recover from these blows. He went for his gun. So, he didn't shoot you when your hands were up in the air. No. But he did shoot you when you pointed your gun at him. Yes. Oh, correct is what he said. And you've got those moments put together and you just go, I'm sorry, but there's just no way you can convict anybody here. But then again, as I say, we've seen plenty of cases in time that have just been completely ludicrous and needed to be unwound in appeals and whatever. So who knows what will happen? But yes, if common sense prevails, he should walk because there is just nothing. What astonishes me so much is that usually in a case like this, you have got two very convincing lawyers presenting a case and both of them have some sort of point, but you must weigh which outweighs the other, if you know what I mean.
Whereas this is one of the most one-sided affairs.
In this one, you just think, I'm sorry, but they just don't have anything. There is nothing on the opposition side. They just don't have a case.
No.
And I think that's why the judge started getting so annoyed. Because
Well,
yes, I know there were some procedural elements and whatever. He shouldn't have presented this as evidence without asking the judge and yada yada. But I think at the heart of it, it simply was the judge was sitting there going, "You are just wasting my time. You don't have anything. We've been sitting here and listening to this rubbish, and you don't have anything." And obviously, this is an experienced lawyer himself, to become a judge.
yeah.
And he knows his onions, so he's sitting there going, "You don't stand a cat's chance in hell.
Don't be brazen with me."
Therefore, of course, he becomes more and more irritable. And there was beautiful moments. I mean, there is the one that's done the rounds on Twitter about, what made you think you could just present this evidence without asking, blah, blah, blah. But there was others, where he's basically saying, "Is this the best picture you've got?" "Oh, no, Your Honour." And he said, "Get the best picture," as in, look, we're looking at pixelated nonsense here.
Yeah.
And you can see in his eyes, he isn't saying it, but his facial expression is saying, "You're trying someone for murder here, and you're giving me the second or third best image, which we can barely make out."
But that's deliberate, because if you show the proper image, it's clear that they've got nothing as well.
And then there's the one where, after that procedural mishap, where he's basically told them off, "You're not allowed to raise this evidence if I have not made a ruling on it. Who do you think you are to just present this evidence?" After that, the Binger tries to talk his way out of it. Mm-hmm. "Well, I believed that you were open to this being suggested and whatever. I acted in good faith."
No, you did not.
The judge just looks at him and just go, "I don't believe you."
Yes, the "I don't believe you" line is amazing.
And yes, that is quite devastating when it's the judge telling one side in the court case, "I don't believe you. Go away."
The what is it? For goodness sake, essentially, Met in a chat is saying, "I'm not sure they're not going to convict him of reckless endangerment." That's one thing, because of course the Binger's argument, that's what I was going to say, has been, because they've realised, I think, they can't get him on the murder thing, but what they think they can do is claim that he was fraudulently impersonating an EMT, right?
What's an EMT?
Medical personnel.
Okay.
With his rifle out there. Because, of course, part of his argument hinged on the fact that, well, you're not actually, you're a cadet with the firefighters and you're a cadet with the medical corps, but you're in training, in your first year of training to do this, and you happen to be a lifeguard, but it's a voluntary role and that sort of thing, But you're not really a medical professional, so you had no...
Unlike Grosskreutz.
No, of course.
Yes. I mean, his St. John's ambulance was just waiting out of sight around the corner.
Yeah, exactly right. So this idea that he had no business being there. So Mayor says, "I'm not sure they're not going to convict him of reckless endangerment." That might happen. But...
Well, yes, but I mean, there is no way, because I mean, always keeping in mind the main charge is murder.
Yeah.
There is no way that murder will stick. Not in a sane world anyway. As I say, unless something just goes gaga, because these things can happen in court cases. But as such, yes, if common sense prevails, there's no way he gets convicted of murder.
So I want to bring up again this BBC article, because again it's this case of omission that I was mentioning, which is generally with the media at large. And one of the frustrating things about this is it's hard to tell sometimes whether or not something is a deliberate omission, or whether or not, when you are the largest broadcaster in the nation, that you have a kind of arrogance about yourself and the fact that you're going to get viewership, and so you are lazier with your background research and your reporting. So, for instance, the article says, in August of last year, riots had erupted on the streets of Kenosha. Kudos, they called them riots, which is something which a lot of outlets are refusing to do. After police shot Jacob Blake, a black man, And that's where that paragraph ends. Mr. Rittenhouse travelled from the city to the city from his home in Illinois. Again, the whole cross-state lines thing implied there. And with a semi-automatic rifle in tow, he said he sought to help protect property from unrest on the streets, which is also untrue, or at best misleading. He was there to provide medical aid to the responders who were defending the property and to anyone who needed it, is what he claims. And the fact that Jacob Blake, the man in the black man who police shot, there's no additional context. All it would take is an additional statement after that. A black man who was shot whilst pulling a knife on police, or whilst reaching for a knife in his vehicle. Right, one of which is the correct statement. I can't remember which one it is now. But it doesn't take very much to research that and find out what the verdict was on that.
In all fairness, I think you're being a bit harsh on them. To be honest.
I am, but that's because they need to be held to a higher standard. That's what it is. It is because the way this is phrased. Otherwise, why mention his race? All right, like you say. Well,
I mean, the reason they're mentioning his race is because that did lead to the riot.
And yet, but
if this would have been a white guy who would have been shot by police, that wouldn't have led to the riot.
But there's nothing related to BLM about this case apart from the fact that was the initial spark of the riots. Because
precisely.
But the three,
which is why they mention him.
Nonsense, because the 3 people who were shot were all white.
Yes,
and none of them were there supporting BLM. Let's be real; they're there to burn and arson and whatnot. There's no real motivation for them to be there on either.
Well, I mean, in all fairness, a similar thing can more than likely be said about Rittenhouse. That I was a medic. Yeah, you were another one of the guys with guns. Standing there in a phalanx. I'm skeptical about that. Let's put it like that.
Okay. Yeah,
but I don't believe for one moment that he went there with the intention to shoot people, as some folks in the US media have actually just outright claimed.
Not even a little bit. Yeah, well, they claimed that he went there to hunt people, right? Like and that essentially him calling anyone need medical is like a.
There was one picture that was used. There was one image that I saw used on Twitter, saying that here he is in a kneeling position.
Oh yeah, which was basically him recovering from.
And you just thought, hang on a moment, that's him getting off the ground. But they've managed to take a still from the film at just that moment where it would look as though he was kind of kneeling on one knee, with his rifle in his hands, ready to take aim to pick off one demonstrator after the other. It's only if you look at the image closely can you actually see that one of his feet is blurred because it's moving, because he is caught in motion.
Yeah.
So it's the level of dishonesty, and that wasn't press. That was just people spreading misinformation deliberately on social media. But yes, you can see how you can be in the other camp, and you can get information fed to you like that, and then you can just think, oh well, this is obvious. I mean, look at it. So you can see how you can be led by the nose here.
In the wider sense, like when it's something like this, when it's so obviously dishonest, right? When it doesn't matter what platform you're on, it doesn't matter what side of the political divide you happen to sit on. I mean, I hesitate. Like, you're either stupid or evil. Like that's if you think that this is not self-defense, if when you've seen the evidence, when you've seen the video, when you've witnessed everything that's gone on with this particular case, if you still come out of this and say, Carl Rittenhouse is evil, he deserves to go to prison or death, then I'm sorry, but you're evil or you're stupid. And I mean, when we have a media class that is not just egging these people on, but feeding them this misinformation, who are deliberately playing a political game with people's lives like this, because...
And you would expect they would have easy access to source material.
Well, they do. Like, it's all deliberate. as far as I can tell. Like because I can't imagine that it's laziness, because it requires quite a lot of effort to do these things. I can't imagine that it's stupidity, because surely you don't get to the position. I mean, I know there are many stupid people who get to positions
stupidity,
of authority.
I think it's possible. Stupidity is perhaps the wrong word. I think you can become victim to your own biases. And I think that's where perhaps there is something to it. That, you saw the descriptions that were used of Rittenhouse, and you felt that it was visceral. That, a Trump-supporting, redneck, gun-loving, that sort of plethora of everything that what the Americans would call a liberal, not how we use it here, but what the Americans would call a liberal would hate, would loathe. And therefore there's a kind of guilt by association that basically, no wonder he did it. He's one of them. And I mean, obviously, you will not be familiar with these films. Mississippi Burning, films like that, where you get this sort of visceral hatred in the Deep South in the 50s. People wanting to lynch blacks and whatever. And you get this representation of these people in films, and no doubt it will have some resemblance to the truth of what went on there, but I think that these people kind of superimpose that onto Rittenhouse. He's one of those.
What do we do? These people are insane, and I mean, what do they produce that is of any value in any part of life?
Well, the thing is, I see this. I do see plenty of this sort of going around in politics these days. That one has this fixed image of someone is this or someone is that, and then one concludes from that everything. And I think, people on the right will also do that about certain people with views that if they're opposed to various things that the right wing supports, then they're all snowflakes, this, that, the other. And that they're more than likely more willing to believe that they're involved in sexual misdemeanors and this, that, and the other, because, of course, they're all degenerates. You know that there is some truth in that. And I just feel that there is either this sort of runaway thing with the bias, that one just simply can't get over one's own bias and just believes it, or that one just sort of flies into some sort of blind rage.
Well, I'm at the point where I'm like, the left or right, that I don't want to be in this place. I want to feel balanced. I want to know that there are good people on both sides. But as far as I can see, leftists in general are paedophiles who can't maintain a good family, who want to destroy the family unit, who want to tear down everything good, who want to create a subsistence class who are dependent on, or at the very least, blasting their heads out on drugs all of the time. They want us not to breed. They want us to they want to kill anything which resembles even a shred of tradition. And there's nothing. I can't see anything positive about it. Like, they're incredibly destructive, evil people.
I would say that is where you let your own biases run away with you.
Because you've got to show me one person. I have yet to find one person.
I really think that is kind of sort of the crystallization of just about the worst of the worst possible.
I don't want to believe it, though, Patricia. This is
you see, I mean, when it comes to it, I think what we've seen. I mean, I've been saying this for years now. The left went insane. The political left went insane. A completely insane wing took over the left. But we have to admit that it is the driving force. So if we basically say the left is, and then we superimpose them, that is not entirely unfair because they are pretty much the ones who are driving the wagon right now. But it doesn't mean that everybody on the left is that. I
No,
mean,
of course not.
Captain Swiss is a leftist, but you wouldn't really categorize him as the description you just gave us.
No, of course not. No. But when, as I said in the thing, I am describing specifically arch leftists here, and in a similar way. If asked to describe arch right wingers, and I do think that exists, then I also see them as worth purging and never being allowed to be put in a position of authority or power. Right? The reason that at least they're ostracized, generally speaking, in polite society today. But on the other side of it, I see all these people in positions of authority and positions of power, making particular decisions. Evil when you see it, and that's where I see it at the moment. It's one of the places I can see it because it's being acted on. That's the thing.
It is not healthy for one side of the political spectrum to go gaga. It's just as simple as that. It isn't healthy. My fear is, from what I'm seeing, is that rather than the left becoming more sane, is that we're seeing effectively the same insanity take hold of the right. And that is a major worry. In the end, somebody has to be the grown-up.
We used to be at the position where we said, look, if you can't do this because we'll just be as bad as if we win using their particular tactics. If we can't win on our own merit and our own platform and our own standards, then we'll just end up being a different stripe of their kind of tyranny when we get into power, or if we get into power. We being whatever group is saying this, right? And then at the same time, you've got what I see now, which is that things are ramping up, shall we say, to such hysteria as to say, well, if we don't win at all, then we'll be dead. And therefore, some people say, if you kill your enemies, you lose is a stupid statement, that sort of thing, which is coming.
I mean, what we're ending up with really is the exaggeration in which it's either us who rule or it's tyranny. And of course, the word tyranny then gives you license to do all manner of things because you're the champion of freedom and you're resisting tyranny.
No, but I think a lot of people just want their own stripe of tyranny and are quite happy to admit that that's what they want. They're at the point where they're going, I'm sick of it. I don't want to tolerate this. The idea of your lies and your ideas being propagated disgusts me. Therefore, we should get rid of you. That's what we hear. I don't think there's very many people at the moment who are actually advocating for a freedom-based thing, apart from, in some regard, some of the libertarian types who get a bad rap anyway because they get, they're lolbertarians, far too liberal on liberal in the actual liberal sense on so many other issues, that would be considered to be untenable to either sort of general side. They want to legalize drugs, which is never going to run with the Conservatives, and at the same time they want to allow private armies, which is never going to run with the left, that sort of thing.
Private armies don't strike you as a very good idea.
No, not
do
at
they?
all. Not
I mean, if you don't like what Google might have to say about what you're allowed to post on YouTube or not, why would you want them to run an army?
Although, in a general sense, like this already happens, right? So the security is hired by all these persons in power. But also, if you look at historically, even in this country, it's something like the police force. The police force has been centralised for not really that long a period of time compared to the rest of the UK. We had police which were broadly categorised by the term, but were largely independent units. And you can make all sorts of arguments about the efficacy of such a system, but to me it's clear that the Met is a leviathan that is no longer serving the general public in the way that it should anyway. I mean, I don't think anyone really disagrees.
Again,
with that.
I don't think that's got anything to do with its organisational structure. I think that's got to do with the values that presently
Of course it does, because the values that
prevail.
the values that prevail and the values which dictate its ordinances do not come from the local communities from which those forces stem, but instead come down from a centralised government, and that centralised government has the values of that present government, and that therefore government policy ends up influencing things which would previously you wouldn't really be able to influence, because a local constabulary might just say, well, fob off basically to something which comes down from government. We've run things the way we've run it, and it's been that way for 200
I have my
years.
doubts there, to be honest. I think when we see with what ease diversity officers and whatever have swept into just about every corner of the country, I don't think there are too many local councils who are basically saying, up with this we will not put because it does not agree with our values.
Of course they're not.
And in that same way, I don't think that would happen with the police. I really think that you're perhaps idealising
Not really.
an alternative to what we have now.
I don't think so. I'm also not advocating the return to that system. I just think that that's what, like, you are creating a single point of failure, and creating a single point of failure almost invariably goes very, very wrong. It is possible to have too many cogs, so to speak. So one of the ways, like, to take the other tack, the military at the
Too many
moment,
Cressida Dicks.
well, the military at the moment is falling apart, and one of the reasons it's falling apart is contractors. There are too many contractors, right? It's not a unified entity, and therefore it can barely function because it's just caught up constantly in negotiation and delays due to bureaucracy.
Everything is admin.
Right? Yeah. Everything is admin, everything is management, everything is bureaucracy, and that drives us mad anyway. And
nobody can pick up the phone and just tell the other person at the other end to do this.
well, no, it's like I was reading about the formation of the SAS the other day, for instance, and one of the things that happened was I can't remember the name of the chap who founded it now, but he basically got permission to do it, and then he was discharged from his unit and off he went, and just sort of found people and then got them to transfer to him, the next week or whatever. It was this kind of surreal system where you can't imagine the government of today just allowing, or even the military of today, just allowing a unit to be formed as a sort of a confluence of other units. No. We would have to form a new entry pathway. That entry pathway would have to have its own training regimen. Everything would have to be approved through banks of committees and officials, and blah, 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 as opposed to a new unit.
Everything is a process, as opposed to just getting the right people and then allowing them the freedom to make the right decisions. Because... yes. I mean, you can look at the same thing with, what's he called? Our friend Attenborough, Greta Thunberg's best friend. He obviously had several careers prior to, being the chief global warming advocate. And one of them, for a while, he actually held a very high position in the BBC. And when he was in that position, he brought in Monty Python. He commissioned Monty Python.
Oh, really?
He commissioned Ken Clarke, and he commissioned Jacob Bronowski. And those two men made what are still regarded the two best documentaries ever produced by the BBC. And what it was is that I think he knew them from Cambridge, and he basically knew that they were going to produce something exceptional. And so he pretty much just gave them the money. and said, well, here are the funds. Here is a, producer or whatever to help you make the thing because you're not familiar with making film. And now please go away and come back when you're finished. And Jacob Bronowski in particular just disappeared. I mean, he just vanished. And for about a year or so, they didn't know where he was. And then eventually he returned and he had all this just reams and reams of film material. And then he put it together into this series, which is just magical. I mean, I know it's sort of dated, some of the computer graphics and whatever, but I would advise anybody, to give it a watch. Jacob Bronowski's Ascent of Man. And it really is truly one of the greatest things ever put on TV. But that was just it. It wasn't that, you see, we've got a commissioning bureau, and then you'll have to go to such and such department, and then you'll have to supply us with that information in triplicate, and then you need to do... No, it was literally, I am the person who is permitted to make these decisions. I know this chap can produce absolute excellence, therefore I'm going to ask him, and we're just going to give him the funds because we know he won't run away with it, and then we will see what he comes up with. And
the golden edge of nepotism, as it were.
John Cleese basically makes a similar argument. I mean, they've asked him time and time again to do another series, a comedy series for the BBC, and he's refused them every time because he said, "Look, it just doesn't work anymore. Once upon a time, we gave you the idea of what we wanted to make. You gave us the money, and then you left us alone. And then we came back with the finished product and went, there you go, now put it on television. Whereas now, you want updates all the way through. You're constantly looking over our shoulder." And he says, look, one of the major problems is that the bureaucrats in your institution, you're not comedians. You don't have a place in the writing office. You don't get to say what works and what doesn't. So just get out of our hair. And as long as you're not prepared to do that, then I'm not prepared to come and work for the BBC. I'm not going to do anything for you. And yes, he's had that stand now for the last 20, 30 years or so. I think he did some series in which he appeared, but he didn't write anything. More than likely just to help pay the bills. But as such, yes, he just refuses, and he's made it quite plain why. And that's just it. At some point, these institutions have to have the trust within themselves, within their own capacity, not to become these blind sort of followers of procedure, where you're basically looking at the character from Little Britain. Computer says, no, that one. And there's this wonderful expression in German. It's Operation gelungen, Patient tot, and it's sort of the best of German black sarcasm, and it directly translated it means operation successful, patient dead.
What?
And it's used in situations where you get trapped in sort of Kafkaesque bureaucracy, whereby if you think of it, that's how a lot of public service works. Oh, we've got the form, and you see we've ticked all the boxes, so we've done the right thing. We've done our part. We've ticked the boxes. We went through that procedure. Whereas in a lot of private industry, well, in most of private industry, unless it's to do with the government, the procedure is actually, has it been successful? Has the client, has the customer got what he wanted? As opposed to, we've checked the boxes.
Yeah.
And that's just it. As long as we've checked the boxes, we have gone through the correct procedure. Therefore, the procedure is a success. Whether the patient is still alive is irrelevant. So, operation successful, patient dead, is sort of, it is that in a nutshell. That we've become more and more these sort of sequence of processes whereby everything has to have a process. So very often it has to have a process, so the staff doesn't need to be trained to adequately know these things, or at least you can hollow out middle management. And then you can just hire Susan from Tesco and put her in front of a computer, and then she gets the questionnaire from the computer as to what she has to ask the client, and then she enters that into the computer. Whereas if you go back 30 years ago, she more than likely would have had to be trained to know what the hell she was talking about. And therefore everything throughout society, and computerization has a lot to do with it, has become these ludicrous procedures, these processes. And it's all in order to, as they think, eliminate human error. But of course, it does something else to society. And that was what was so beautifully illustrated in that little repeat sketch in Little Britain, with the data typist just going, computer says no. And, yeah.
That was, I'm not sure entirely how long that anecdote was. Where did we start with that one? I mean, it makes sense.
Somewhere we were talking about the military and how everything is now being contracted out, and then at some point we ended with bureaucracy and procedures and everything becoming more and more brain dead. But I mean, I don't know. Are you old enough to have seen some of the demise of that, or are you that young that to you it's always been like that, and that is just the way it is?
I mean, I was raised in the 90s, so...
I mean, what I mean is, when you look at Dad's Army, Captain Mannering. Captain Mannering is the sort of quintessential local bank manager. So he is the guy who is kind of made good, the local chap who's made good, and he runs the bank. But he needs to know everything that is about banking. There isn't the computer.
Yeah.
There isn't a computer who can tell him what to ask the client, and then he needs to feed into the computer the answers, and then the computer says whether this client gets a loan or not. So he needs to know how to evaluate whether he wishes to give this client a loan or not. And what was it? There was the man from the Pru, wasn't there? There was all these guys in Britain. There was a little army of prudential insurance representatives. So basically, every town had one, and they would know everything there is to know about the insurances, the various insurances that the Prudential would offer. And they were kind of seen as a little sort of institution. It was a little army throughout Britain. But of course, all of them had to be competent. They needed to know what on earth they were doing.
This is one of the reasons why I feel like some people talk about bringing the guilds back, for instance. And now what we have instead of guilds are societies, I suppose, is the best way to describe it. And additionally, one of the issues with these societies is the barrier for membership is very low. So whilst bringing guilds back and societies made proper works in some ways for some things, particularly tradespeople, I think, because you can't Google search a kitchen counter into existence, right? You can't Google search the creation of a table. You can't Google search the building of a house. Even if a lot of this stuff can be automated over time, and so the people who designed such things and the people who do it in a similar way that certain other trades even with digital crossover. I think about architects, right? And any architect who draws by hand, because even though most architects nowadays draw using Box Simulator 101, but there is a scope for a kind of competence that doesn't muddy the waters. You have to be competent at your job, otherwise you'll simply get no work, and you'll simply get no work if you don't improve yourself, and so you need to know things which are going to make your life easier. You need to know what kinds of pipes are going to suit the ground that you live in, etc., etc. But then you have things like, take my own discipline, right? Take psychology, and if I'm on, anyone could pass a psychology course if you've got a Google search right there. But the people I know who did exceptionally well, the especially competent, the people who would read studies for fun and had an almost encyclopedic knowledge of particular areas and fields of study, right? Those are the people who deserve to have a position in the guild or the society or whatever it happens to be. And the people who Google, who pass their exams because they happen to be, they were at-home, take-home, open book exams. There's the argument in education, isn't there, at the moment? What is the function of an exam? They used to tell us when we were at school, well, you need to be able to do mental maths because you won't always have a calculator in your pocket. And what is the state of affairs now? Well, everyone has
everyone has a calculator.
Everyone has a calculator in their pocket, and much more than a calculator at that. And you look at this, and I look at studies, for instance, which look at the changing nature of memory formation and the changing nature of attention span. And you go, well, attention spans are going down. Memory formation is now much more weighted towards the short term. People simply aren't committing as much information to long-term memory, and then we wonder why we have a deficit in terms of... sorry, not a deficit. We have a plethora of later life mental conditions, especially things like Parkinson's and other forms of dementia, which appear to be on the rise. And one of the reasons is aging population, and another reason is that people just do not exercise their brain in the same way that they used to have to. You hear an interesting factoid, and it goes in, and at any other time in human history, you might have committed that to memory, not just because it would be an interesting thing to know, but also because you're probably not going to speak to your friend until later, or your family, or whatever it happens to be. And you need to therefore have promoted that memory formation in order to do it. And then, so memory used to be a lot better. I mean, you can see it in certain, not uncontacted tribes, but you know where there are peoples with an oral history. Right, they're much more of an oral history. I certainly noticed it in places like Kenya, where you just have someone who just has this enormous knowledge. They know everything that has ever happened in that area with anyone. They're the equivalent of the history search engine, basically. Because otherwise, it would all fall out of memory, and no one would ever remember it. It's really important to be able to do this. Now, not everyone can do it. There's some people like that person who are going to be sort of super brains, but most people would have had a greater deal of memory capacity that is no longer being used, and I'm concerned. In the sense that there's not much I can do about it. I'm not going to commit the rest of my life to trying to figure out a solution to this, and try and basically rally against the influence of the internet in this regard. But it's something that I'm certainly aware of for myself, and in trying to read more and that sort of thing. It does make me worry.
There was something I saw a few years ago, which was from Iran, and they sort of followed this old guy, but apparently this was kind of sort of a tradition in Iran, so it's not as if he was the only one. And he would literally, a bit like old Homer, I mean, that's what we believe Homer did, he would literally go from town to town. And his job description was teller of tales.
Yep.
And he would have all these old legends and whatever stored away in his mind, and he would tell them. And people would then basically just give him a place to stay for the night, and give him a meal, and perhaps pay him a few pennies. And that's what he did. He just went from town to town and entertained everyone for the night, telling them these ancient tales.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's how the oral tradition sort of gets passed on. And one dreads to think how long one needs to be an apprentice of such a storyteller before one eventually has got a sufficient repertoire to be able to do it oneself.
Well, especially considering that experts, shall we say, in various fields are rarely great teachers. So it's someone who has to sit there and essentially, by osmosis, pick it up. And so the skill that gets passed down as well is not just it's not just the ability to teach, but it's the ability to recognize people who have the ability to learn. So, it's picking your apprentice well as anything else. Otherwise,
there's also, of course, and this will sooner or later also be a dying breed because. How long these people will be protected, even though I have a great deal of sympathy for them, to be honest. Black cab drivers in London. I mean, which part of their brain, is it the hippocampus? I'm not sure, is supposed to be better developed with them. There is some part of the brain that is believed to be better developed with black cab drivers. Now, are they so good at memorizing things because they've got that advantage, or does it actually develop because they're using it so much? But yes, the ability to have... I mean, how many roads do they need to know? Something like 20,000, isn't it? It's a ridiculous...
They have the test, isn't it, called the knowledge?
The knowledge, yes.
And yeah, it's 20,000 landmarks, but 25,000 streets and 320 routes, all by heart.
It's fantastic. I mean, it is. It's an institution, and yes, you can say, oh well, we could do it cheaper with an Uber driver and Google Maps or whatever. But the ability to jump into a taxi and just say, "Take me to so and so," to this and this place, and they just drive off. They don't need to turn around and go, well, now, where is that? Is it off such and such street? No, they just drive. They know where it is.
Yep, they just know.
And I think it takes them about 2 years, doesn't it? I mean,
2 to 4.
Many of them sort of drive around London on a scooter and just tick off the landmarks and the place names and whatever. But you can jump into a taxi and just say, take me to the Reform Club.
And they'll know where it is.
Yeah. They know where it is.
It's something like... I know that it rewrites the navigational pathways in the brain, but I don't know if it actually grows in size. But it becomes... They do become a London encyclopedia in a sense.
And they have got access to those little sort of miniature houses, those green little huts. The guy from Jules Guides always likes going on about them.
Green huts? What's this now?
Yeah, around London there are a few sort of green, almost like green sheds, placed all over the place, and they were put up when London cabs were those little hansom cabs.
Yeah.
And you had these drivers out with their horses in all weathers. And at some point, some aristocrat decided that this wasn't good enough. They needed to have a shelter so that they could be on call. They could be in the centre of London waiting for trade, but they would have somewhere to actually shelter, because otherwise they're sitting on top of that hansom cab just being rained on.
Yeah.
And he said, no, we need to give them some shelter. We need to give them a place. So he then bought little sort of parcels of land, and on them were erected those little green sort of sheds, the little huts. And outside there are still little rails at which they would tie the horse to.
Hitching rails, yeah.
And but yes, they are, because obviously now those hansom cabs then eventually evolved into the hackney cabs of today. The black cab drivers, they are still entitled to use those little huts.
Oh, really?
And I think some of them now are like little kiosks that sell food.
Huh.
So you can on the outside buy food off the kiosk, but only the cab drivers are allowed to go inside.
Well, that's neat. I presume it's just like a little. I don't know how large these things are, but I assume there's a sofa inside.
No,
Or whatever.
these are not lavish confections. They're, as I say, they're a little shed, if you know what I mean. But they're
Yeah.
all painted green.
I shall have to keep an eye out for them. I didn't see that. I know they've been around in their modern form, so to speak, since 1865, which is a considerable amount of
Which is a
time.
way back, yes.
That's a tradition. I can understand why they were so frustrated with the whole Uber debacle as it was. You can't stop the march of progress, but what can you do to preserve your tradition when essentially a GPS does better than you can and is only fractionally slower in terms of the uptake? It just takes a little longer to type in the address than to just recall it.
Yes, but I think everything about the black cabs is better. I mean, I've never understood why the black cabs didn't take over the world. Why are they still driving in those yellow vehicles around New York? Why didn't they just start driving the hackney cabs just with a steering wheel on the other side? Because it is by far and away the best designed taxi on the planet. And I've never understood why it never took over the world. I think in some places, I think, is it Singapore? They've imported them. They've got quite a few of them over there. There are apparently some places where one does drive those much more specialised vehicles, but it can carry 5 people. There's room for a sea chest next to the driver. It's got a ridiculous turning circle. It's by far and away the best taxi.
Yeah.
It's the only vehicle that's ever been designed to be a taxi. Everybody else just uses a regular road car and just paints it in a certain colour and sticks a sign on top. That's the only one that has kind of evolved into being the ideal taxi. And therefore I've never understood why they don't have a booming trade with the rest of the world of selling these models. But I'll never understand.
One of the great injustices of the British timeline. This does that.
Well, I mean, it's just perfect every way round. And that's why I think the black cabs perhaps do deserve some protection, because it is the kind of the pinnacle of the taxi. So you've got a guy in there who is a kind of memory genius. He knows where to take you. He's driving a specialist vehicle, whereas an Uber driver is just some chap in a car with a GPS.
Yep. Where's the prestige? I'm gonna run through the super chats now. So Artful Lodger says, Keyboard Protector Fund. This is in response to my sneeze earlier. Thank you very much, Artful Lodger. Always appreciated. So Scowen says, 184 seconds late. Disappointing. Also, liked your expressiveness last time. Is this my first compliment? Oh, I'm sure you've complimented me before, says Scowen. Last week I was quite aggressive. Yes.
Not so obvious. I think he's forgotten to adjust his clock, hasn't he?
Yeah, he has indeed. We are clearly 62 seconds early.
We're ahead of time this time around. So this is ridiculous.
Ahead, The Harry
these
Channel...
scurrilous allegations being bandied about by these sort of Scandinavians out there. What can I say?
The Harry Channel says, the SR-71 is the last great / bonkers aircraft of all time. That would be the SR-71 Blackbird, presumably. It was designed primarily by Kelly Johnson. Now it's all designed by committees.
Have you ever heard that clip on YouTube? I mean, if not, eventually do go and look for it. In which there is a guy who basically zoomed. Is it LA Airport, or I don't remember which airport it was anymore. But yes, he's in a Blackbird,
Okay.
And he's basically telling this story later. So basically, this is an ex-pilot, and he's telling an audience how they came in low, and had the afterburner on. And I think what is it? I think the story is he was on a flight basically where he was just a passenger. So if you're a pilot, you can basically hop on and sit with the pilots and be flown to wherever it is you need to go to then fly another flight. And somehow he gets to talking with somebody, and he finds out that that person was at that airport at the time. And he says, you do, was there anything? Says, oh, yes. We all dived for cover. We thought we were being bombed. There's some wonderful ones. There's also one in which there is a sort of speed reading in which, pilots ask, because there might be crosswinds or whatever that, don't allow them to gauge exactly how fast they're traveling across the ground. And so it's some Cessna or whatever asking for a speed reading. Can you tell me how fast I'm actually traveling? And then the tower gets back saying, we've got a reading. You're traveling so and so. So many 100 miles per hour.
Yeah.
And then of course some guy in a bigger plane.
Yeah. Can I get a
obviously
speed
has
reading,
to come
please?
in and say, just can you give me a speed check there, tower? So the guy at the tower, he's sort of saying, in his mind's eye, you could see him. He's kind of rolling his eyes, going, "Oh, okay." So, you're going 500 miles an hour. Well done, or whatever. 300 miles an hour, something like that. And then he just hears, "Oh yes, hello. Here is XYZ." So it was some F-18 pilot over California. Can you give me a speed reading, please? So, of course, the tower gives the reading, and of course it's something ludicrous compared to these Cessnas and whatever. So here this jock in his plane was feeling really macho. And he was sitting there in his pilot seat going, "Oh, I really shouldn't, but I'm so tempted." And the next thing he could hear is his navigator behind him just press the button. "Yes, hello, LA Tower. Could you give us a speed reading, please?" Of course, they're in a Blackbird. So the number they got was something like, you're going at 1,000 miles an hour at the moment.
It's absurd, like Mach 2.
And he said, and after that, there was nothing but silence.
No, nobody asked for a speed reading after that. I'm gonna find this. You got a ground speed readout for us?
They are out there somewhere. If you look up Blackbird or SR-71, or you'll find those clips. They are very, very funny.
I have got the statement. He said, "Center Aspen 20, you got a ground speed readout for us? There was a longer than normal pause. Aspen, I show 1,942 knots. No further inquiries were heard on that frequency." That's fantastic. Yes, I think that's Brian Schull. I think I've read his book on the SR-71. It's called Sled Driver, if I'm remembering correctly, which is a fantastic book. Anyway, but that's fun. Definitely worth a read if you're interested in that sort of thing. We mentioned taxi drivers. I suppose we should mention the fact that there's been this terror attack on.
Oh, yes, there has been a fireworks display of sorts in Liverpool, isn't there?
Yeah, the Liverpool Women's Hospital. So someone got in a taxi and said, "Could you take me to the hospital, please?" Apparently, they were trying to get to the Remembrance Day parade, but couldn't figure out a way to get there, so they got in a taxi and decided to go blow up a hospital instead. Went there and he set the bomb off, and when the taxi driver, David Perry, noticed he was setting it off, the report claims that he locked the passenger doors and fled the vehicle. and then the whole thing blew up, and he received.
Well, I've seen film of it since, so
Okay.
he was in the vehicle when it blew up.
Yeah, pretty much. Oh, when it first started going off, yes.
When it went off, he was in.
Yeah.
So when the explosion happens, he was in, but it didn't kill him. So I think it burst his eardrums, but it didn't kill him.
Yeah, he has some superficial injuries, but thankfully he had very little.
So then he kind of leapt out, and so he must have, if he had locked the doors, he must have then unlocked the doors and leapt out.
No. Well, as the taxi driver, he could lock the passenger doors by themselves.
Yeah,
just
but then it starts burning.
Yeah.
Whether at that point the guy inside is still alive, I don't know, and I'm not sure we care. But of course, what is also interesting with these suicide bombers is, where did the penis go?
I'm sorry, what?
Yes, because I remember distinctly, I think it was John Simpson once who did a piece about some suicide bomber in Iraq. So he had been at the hotel, and there had been a suicide bomber who set himself off just outside the hotel, because of course they've got all these barriers in front of these things, haven't they? So you can't get in. And he commented in some detail as to where the penis was found, because what you have to remember is, these guys strap these explosives to themselves and then set themselves off. Now, obviously, it will tear the body apart, but various extremities will then, of course, be catapulted away from the body. One of the big quizzes is, where does the head land? So they decapitate themselves when they do these things. But, the funny thing is, of course, is that the penis was found on, I think, the concreted area around the swimming pool on the far side of the hotel.
Oh.
And he didn't say it. I mean, he's a champion for not saying it. I mean, I would not have been able to not say it. But you just wonder, given that he pretty much castrated himself while blowing himself up, in order to get to the 17 virgins or whatever that he has promised as a martyr, can you foresee a complication there?
Well, depending on whether or not you believe in reincarnation of the soul or of the flesh. Yes, I can't imagine. It's,
these things are worth contemplating when one just thinks of the ridiculousness of these folks.
Fake accents unite. The only place where Britisher can contemplate the penis of a terrorist.
But yes, I just think it's a sort of a lovely thought that they catapult their penises across the entire hotel in order to reach their virgins.
For some, for a religion predicated on the idea that Allah is the only one who can punish with fire, they do often burn themselves alive quite a lot, don't they?
Yes, I mean, this guy, we don't know whether he was alive or while he was being incinerated or not. But of course, there is the famous moment where, wasn't one of them a doctor? I think possibly both of them were doctors, which again says a lot about academia these days. The guys who try to ram a Range Rover into Glasgow Airport. But they hadn't actually bothered to sufficiently reconnoitre the place to assess whether their Range Rover would fit through the entrance.
Oh dear.
So when they had their Range Rover loaded full of gas canisters and various other flammables, and then accelerated towards the gate, all that happened was a sudden stop, a grinding noise, and the whole thing came to a stop, wedged in the entrance. And of course, their flammables went off, and one of them leapt from the car on fire, and was running around screaming Allahu Akbar until a Scotsman...
Yes, kicked him in the balls.
Yes. And I think also thumped him in the head.
Welcome to Scotland.
And yes, you do just wish that he added "Welcome to Scotland."
I think that is my favourite Scottish terrorism story. Although I thought it was there was a slightly different start to it, but no, that makes sense to me. But yes, I posted on Twitter earlier, although Twitter is misbehaving at the moment with regards to notifications and whatnot. But I posted a tweet because I was curious. This is the second Islamic terrorist attack in as many months, a high profile at least. So, if you run the stats, according to the 2011 census, 1 in 69 Muslims in the UK is a terror suspect at the moment, which is an extraordinary statistic. And the Met Police, or a former Met Police, I can't remember what position they held, but they basically they went on the record as saying that there is an obsession with finding right-wing terror in the building at the moment, and that whereas they seem to be ignoring the preponderance of actual large.
They're insisting effectively on diversity in terrorism.
Yeah, or lack thereof.
I mean, I don't know whether I mentioned it on this stream or whether it was another stream I mentioned it on once. But yes, I did once mention. If you actually look at the figures and you start sort of thinking it through, you will discover that it is actually a frightening proportion of Muslims. So I don't know how reliable that figure is, but what I did was basically sort of look at the total number of them in this country. Then the fact that half of them are women. So it's not really the women who tend to be the terrorists.
If you split it down,
then you have a given proportion of children and whatever.
Yeah.
And if you then consider that there are 3,000 people who are under constant observation in this country, and there are 20,000 people furthermore believed to be suspects, and then you've got 23,000 people, and then you look at what the proportion of that is to that number you've reduced it down to, you realise actually this is actually frightening proportion.
Yeah. So if you reduce things down, so if you take the Muslim census, which is slightly more up to date than the 2011 census, then the figure becomes 1 in 85 for all total Muslims. The terror suspects current as of 2020, late 2020, that are being investigated has doubled. So there's 42,000 something. So basically, you end up with 37,000. Where's it? Because somebody asked me. 43,000 terror suspects in the UK as of 2020. 90% are apparently Islamic, so that's 38,700. And then there are 3.3 million Muslims, according to Muslim Census UK, which puts the stat at 1 in 85. But then if you work out that actually only about 40% of those 3.3 million are actually likely to be the people on that terror list, then you end up with a much more sobering statistic as well, which is something in the region of 1 in 34 working age males. 1 in 34 working age male Muslims is a terror suspect, which is obscene. It's quite scary.
I mean, whatever the exact figures are is almost irrelevant.
Even at the most
so staggering.
Even at the most conservative, it's still lower than 1 in 100, and that's obscene. That's absurd. Absolutely absurd.
And that to me is kind of the chief argument when it comes to immigration. Because, I mean, I, some time ago, said we shouldn't allow Muslim immigration anymore. And it shouldn't be because one has any, hatred or whatever towards them. It's just practicality. You just look at it and you just think, well, hang on a moment. If for every 100 or so, another person comes in who then needs to be observed or needs to go on some sort of list, what are we doing to ourselves? This is ridiculous. So, so I just think, yes, that is a serious issue. And I remember there was a wonderful clip that Lionel once did. I don't know if you're familiar with Lionel Media on Twitter.
Rings a bell, but I don't follow.
He's I don't tend to agree with Lionel on a lot of things. I think there is an element of populism there. He goes where the views are, if you know what I mean.
Okay,
but
rank pundit.
He is he is from Talk Radio, I believe, and I think he's also a practicing lawyer or whatever. So he's very engaging, and he has this thing he does whereby he just sits there and looks into the camera. But it's a sort of at an angle and whatever. You can imagine that you're basically sitting in a cafe with him, and he is opposite you at the table, and he's talking to you about these things, and he is incredibly engaging in these things. So I would highly advise, even if only to get a flavour of what this guy does, just to listen to him for one or two videos. But he once described the case of what had effectively happened in places like New York, where the FBI eventually approached, leaders is perhaps the wrong word, but, sort of representatives from the Italian-American community.
Yeah.
And just said, look, we've got a massive mafia problem here. Now, you have got to start handing over these people. We don't want any of this, they're from the old country nonsense. It's going to have to happen. And if it doesn't happen, we will find ways of making things extremely uncomfortable for all of you. And basically, I don't know how long ago he made that clip, but he said, well, that, strictly speaking, is what broke the mafia's back. That obviously it still limped on for years and years thereafter, and there were still, mobsters and whatever, but that sort of huge upswell of organised violence that, you remember from Al Capone and whatever, that got knocked on the head. And it got knocked on the head by the feds over there effectively saying, look, we just won't tolerate your life's misery if you don't start being on our side, effectively. You're either Americans or you're Italians. If you insist on being Italians, well then, screw you. And I think to a certain extent something similar has to happen. The culture has to change. That basically, okay, you can be here, but you have to understand that you're on this side of the fence now. And if you still insist on, yes, but they're from the old country, then that is just not going to work. And it sounds a terribly illiberal thing to say, but something has to be done to solve this problem. And my main feeling is simply that what is happening is that the authorities are managing the problem, but nobody is actually seeking to provide a solution.
Yeah.
And that therefore one just provides more security services. One polices that, but it's management. It's okay. We've had this disaster. Let's try and seem confident and express our sympathy, have a candlelit vigil, and then move on. Whereas, of course, in the end, something has to be done because this has now been going on for 20 years, and this is not a normal state of affairs. And we've had an entire generation by now grow up to whom this is normal. They don't know a life outside of this state of affairs.
Yeah.
And, when you say you grew up in the 90s, and we didn't have this in the 90s. And it must be stressed, this is exceptional, this is not normal. And there should be some sort of sense of urgency to get back to normality. Instead, we are just basically, we're managing it.
Yeah. It's to be honest, there are ways which are, you called it illiberal, but there are ways of dealing with this which don't involve any kind of violence or any kind of particular stripe, and that's just ban halal. Ban halal is like the predominant thing. The Muslim Council of Britain released a statement a couple of years ago, actually saying, if you ban halal, hundreds of thousands of Muslims will leave this country. I'm like, I'm sorry, but I don't see a problem with that if they're choosing to go because the thing that they disagree with happens to be unstunned slaughter, which is happens to be stunned slaughter. Sorry, of which unstunned is what we would consider to be barbarism, and they would be welcome to leave.
If among the millions that are there, hundreds of thousands choose to leave, are they, how much more likely are the people who insist on having it or else they will leave, how much more likely are they to be found on one of those lists?
Yeah, exactly, right? Exactly. Like, you're going to deal with the most extreme element of that particular society. And completely non-violently, and I think without any real resistance apart from via the activists who you can get on moral grounds very, very, very easily. Extraordinarily easily. Just by banning halal slaughter, and they can all become vegans if they like, but I doubt they will.
Well, when some chap called Mr. Patel arrived somewhere in the 1950s to open a little corner shop somewhere in Yorkshire, don't tell me he expected to find halal meat.
No, or to have a market for it if he provided such a thing. And yet here we are in this strange set of affairs. On that rather strange and sobering and
well, it's always somewhat grim, isn't it? But we have these things again and again, and whenever someone blows themselves up or whatever, we end up having to talk about this again.
Well, we all know what the solution is.
It is somewhat disheartening, but what can you do?
Well, we all know the solution. That's the trouble.
Did you see that tweet? Hang on. This is just as a comic afterthought.
As opposed to those tweets.
It was Dave Rubin, I think, who highlighted it.
Go on.
And it was something by NBC News. I can only imagine it's Dearborn in Michigan, but it didn't mention Dearborn. It just said a town in Michigan.
Right.
Has now got an exclusively Muslim council.
Good grief. Oh, yes. A city in Michigan is apparently the first in the nation to elect an all-Muslim city council, reflecting a more racially diverse landscape in local governments. And, of course, the comment is, could somebody Google the word diverse for me? It's just, that's obscene. There is now an enclave. We have this in Britain. But we have this in Britain. There is a country, and I cannot remember the name of the town. There is a country. There is a county, and I cannot remember the name of the town in it. I think either Blackpilled or Black Pigeon Speaks did a video on it at some point. And it's a town. It is 90% Muslim in the Midlands somewhere, and it is like going into another country. Completely. You go into some areas of London, but you expect districts in a multicultural international city like London. But you to go somewhere in the Yorkshire Dales and find that there's an Islamic
I think there are those textile towns in the northwest.
Mikey Bikey said it's called Savile Town, and it is Savile Town Muslim population. According to Savile Town, it is 93. It was 93% Asian Muslim in 2011, and funnily enough, experiencing significant economic decline. I wonder why, but it's just there's no one white there. There's just dear bandies, and that's the idea. I mean, that's a colony. There's where's the British? Where are the British? Where are the English? That scares me in more ways. I wonder where we're going to be in 200 years, in 100 years. Where are we going to exist anymore? I'm not an ethno-nationalist by any stripe.
I think one of the things one always has to consider is that history has a habit of taking unexpected turns, and it's rather hard to predict anything 50 years away, no matter 100 years or 200 years away. Because, all you can do is, if current trends prevail, then this will happen. And you go, okay, yes, but when have current trends ever really prevailed? It's that's the thing, that we have no idea what sort of, the history of mankind is going to entail in the next 200 years. Just consider how much has happened in the last 200 years.
I want to end on an amusing point, which is that people are now referring to Joe Biden as Pootus.
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 Pootus. This is because of the allegations that he
went to the bathroom whilst visiting the Pope. Yes.
Yes. I mean, you say whilst visiting the Pope. I mean, there are allegations of all sorts. The personnel whom he is supposed to be meeting changes at every moment. And I'm not sure I'm convinced by these stories.
No. There appears to be no evidence, as far as I'm aware. There was just it's
a sort of an endless spin on the fact of, how elderly and decrepit he is, and that therefore this is a possibility. And you think, well, yes, it is. But I'm not sure. I mean, today I put out a tweet in which I basically said, given how the Trump presidency went and how the Biden presidency is going, is the American English terminology for the opposition now just the resistance? And I think we have really ended up in this place, and I'm not sure it's a healthy place for the USA to be in.
No, I don't think anyone would describe the state of the US as healthy right now.
I think the biggest disappointment in all of this, I don't know if I've ever said this before, I think the biggest disappointment to me in all of this was Obama. Because, let's face it, with Trump we all knew he was divisive and whatever. And yes, the left had gone completely gaga and lost its mind. It didn't really matter what Trump did, it was evil. And it doesn't really matter what Biden does, he's pooing himself. But with Obama, you have the feeling, here is somebody who really has charisma, and who has got an enormous rhetorical ability.
I was taken in by him as a child, yeah.
And you felt if anybody had the capacity to be a unifying figure, it was him. But instead, he, in a way, started laying the foundations for much of the divisiveness that we now have. I mean, a lot of this woke stuff started effectively being implemented by him, on the quiet, on the sly, just like Blair. Wave something in front of the camera. Look here, and then the other hand is actually passing bills that nobody is ever aware of, if you know what I mean. And that's where I really think that Obama. I know in history, history has a habit of just basically looking at a president and attributing one characteristic to him. So basically, he did this, or he did that, or this was his policy, or he went through that war. that's the way one really looks at presidents. And Obama has the advantage that effectively he is the one who inherited the bankrupt economy after the credit crunch just at the end of Bush's presidency. So he can claim that he was the one who effectively stewarded the US economy, and to a certain extent a large part of the global economy, through that immediate crisis. So that freeze, that moment where the global economy was teetering and could have collapsed, he can say, well, I got us through that. And history will therefore be fairly kind to him, because that will be the main thing for which he is being remembered. However, given the potential of that guy, you look at it and you just say it's just a vast opportunity missed, because America has been becoming two countries for several decades now. And here was somebody who had the gift of the gab, who had the ability to come up with a historic turn of phrase, if you know what I mean. Well, and he wasted it.
We are at that point. We are at the 250-year point. The death of empire is nigh, and who knows what countries will arise out of the ashes.
It's very easy to announce the death of the American Empire. I think the old lady has still a long time to limp on.
Well, we'll see. But in terms of you'll
just look at the technologies. Just look at the military that the US has available now, and ask yourself how long it would take China to even catch up with that. That's without the Americans continuing to move forwards. That's just with the Americans standing still. How long would it actually take someone like China to catch up with that level of technology, with those carrier fleets? It would take a long time.
I think you'd be surprised how quickly it could be done if they... If they poach the people who are competent, who flee the war-torn... in the same way that a lot of the Nazi scientists who got requisitioned after the war,
But I'm really not sure how many people would be fleeing towards China if the Americas, if they're offering, if the United States of America suddenly, I could well imagine all the talent would actually head to Europe.
Well, you say that, but Europe is remarkably difficult to emigrate to for an American, and the Chinese offer a lot of money for Western scientists.
Yes. I mean, I could well imagine that quite a lot of Far East Asian scientists or whatever, they might be the ones tempted. I would say all the others, if they really needed to go somewhere, and as you say, the Americans found room even for Wernher von Braun and whatever. I could well imagine if there is such a pool of knowledge and expertise that needs to go somewhere, the Europeans would open their doors, if only to those people. So I can't really see the Brits turning down, half a dozen leading submarine construction experts. There's
going to be a bidding war, but I do think China will have the edge. But I'm afraid we're out of time for this evening. It's been a pleasure. We've gone through a variety of topics this evening, and
we managed to get through it because you remember at the beginning I told you I've got a rather dodgy connection today, so I'm not sure whether I might not just suddenly disappear at some point.
You should keep.
So far, it's held out.
You should keep this kind of information between you and your physician. I don't want to know about any dodgy connections you have or otherwise. But thank you so much for joining me. Thank you to everyone in the chat for coming along for the ride with us and listening along and leaving comments, etc. Thank you ever so much to the super chatters who keep us going and get us the tea that we need to get us through the evening. And we will see you all next Monday. It's been a pleasure talking for you all. Take care, everyone, and good night.
Toodle pip.